Go Eun-byul is a popular and confident student at the elite Segan school in Seoul. She has it all: friends, academic success, and a close relationship with Han Eun, the school's best swimmer, whom she has known since childhood. But behind the mask of prosperity lies something deeper. At first glance, Eun-byul's life seems perfect, but every now and then a shadow of worry flickers in her gaze. Even among her friends, she sometimes shuts up as if something is troubling her. In Tongyeong, a small coastal town, lives Lee Eun-bi, a sweet, quiet girl who seems to be the exact opposite of Go Eun-byul. Lee Eun-bi grows up in an orphanage and attends a regular school where she is constantly bullied by her classmates. Kang So-yeon, the main bully of the class, bullies her mercilessly, while the rest of the kids just watch or try to stay away for fear of becoming a target themselves. Teachers either don't notice what is happening or prefer not to interfere, pretending that nothing is happening. Day after day, Eun-bi becomes more and more withdrawn, trying hard not to show her younger friends at the orphanage how hard it is for her. Her torment reaches its peak when So-yeon accuses her of stealing. This time the accusation is so serious that the principal decides to expel Eun-bi from school. Although the accusation is completely false, Eun-bi, broken and tired, can't find the strength to protest. As she leaves the school, her face expresses utter despair. Her only chance for a normal life, already elusive, now seems to be completely ruined. Meanwhile, in faraway Seoul, Go Eun-byul begins to receive strange messages. In class, she receives a text message from an unknown sender who clearly knows more about her than she should. The message makes her nervous, and though she immediately deletes it, her inner anxiety continues to grow. She catches herself checking her phone more and more often, afraid to see another message. Her friends notice her changes, but she waves it off, claiming that everything is fine. However, her anxious state suggests otherwise. The situation escalates when Segan's school organizes a trip to Tongyeong. A seemingly ordinary excursion turns into something much more meaningful for Eun-byul. Even on the bus, she becomes inexplicably anxious. The city seems frighteningly familiar, though she tries to convince herself that it's just a coincidence. As soon as they arrive in Tongyeong, however, her condition worsens. She becomes brooding, sinking more and more into her thoughts. As the students begin to explore the city, Eun-byul walks away from the group and begins to wander alone, as if something or someone is attracted to her. On one of the narrow streets, her gaze clings to an inconspicuous detail, an old store that she can't just walk past. She stops, as if her feet have frozen in place on their own. At this time, Lee Eun-bi, in a state of utter despair, decides to commit suicide. She heads to the bridge where she leaves her school uniform and a suicide note. Her eyes are full of pain and determination. She climbs the railing of the bridge and, clenching her teeth, jumps into the icy water of the river, convinced that this is the only way to free herself from endless suffering. At that moment, Go Eun-byul, driven by a strange premonition, finds herself nearby. As she wanders the streets of Tongyeong, she unwittingly witnesses this terrifying moment. At first, she doesn't realize what she's seeing, but when reality hits her, horror appears on her face. She takes a step back, as if struck by an invisible force, and suddenly disappears in an unknown direction. Her friends and teachers begin to search for her, but soon realize the trail is gone. There's no trace of her except her abandoned phone, which is still lit up with that strange message. Meanwhile, Lee Eun-bi drowns in the cold river. The water engulfs her body, and her last thought escapes with her last gulp of air. The current carries her away, her fate hanging in the balance. It is only a short time later, when she is discovered by a random passerby, that she is pulled out of the water, but she is no longer responsive. Her consciousness disappears, as if with her life, and she is plunged into endless darkness. Go Eun-byul, on the other hand, remains missing, and only dark suspicion surrounds her disappearance, as well as the fate of Lee Eun-bi, who is lost in the waters of the river. Lee Eun-bi faints in the icy water and has no memory of how she was rescued and brought to the hospital. When she regains consciousness, her mind is shrouded in a thick veil, and the only thing she feels is a strange sense of emptiness. The muffled voices of doctors can be heard around her, but their words seem distant and incomprehensible. Her mind, still reeling from the shock, is unable to grasp a single memory. She opens her eyes, but everything around her is blurry, as if she is looking through thick glass. The doctor notices that she is awake and begins to ask questions, but she only shakes her head helplessly at all the answers. Her name, her home, the reason she was in the river, all disappear. At the same time in Seoul, Go Eun-byul's family is plunged into anxiety. Their daughter has gone missing, and they are scrambling to find any clue to her. The mother, tormented by guilt and anxiety, desperately cuts the phone lines, calling everyone she knows, but the answers only add to her misery. It is inconceivable to her that her daughter could have simply disappeared, as if vaporized. Yi-han, Eun-byul's best friend, is beside himself with worry. He remembers every detail of their last conversation, trying to find the answer to what could have happened to the girl he's known since childhood. He finds it hard to believe that she could have left voluntarily. However, neither he nor her friends are left with the oppressive feeling that she may have been the victim of something terrible. Meanwhile, Eun-bi, who is in the hospital, feels lost, but is soon visited by a woman who introduces herself as her mother. The woman hugs her tightly, tears of joy streaming down her face as she calls her name Go Eun-byul. But Eun-bi can't reciprocate. Her mind is completely blank. The woman is convinced that she's her daughter and accepts it as fact without looking into the subtleties of amnesia. Soon Eun-bi, unable to remember who she was, and with no other support in the world, begins to live the life of Go Eun-byul. Back in the house that is now her new home, Eun-bi is confronted with a world that is completely unfamiliar to her. The spacious rooms, the expensive furniture, the family photos in which she is supposed to be depicted as Go Eun-byul, all seem alien and frightening. But she has to accept it all as her own. She learns that Go Eun-byul was a popular girl surrounded by attention and care, but gradually begins to realize that this life hid many secrets. She returns to Sigan High School where she is greeted by Go Eun-byul's friends, but she feels like a stranger in this role. Everything seems unfamiliar to her, her classmates, her classes, even the layout of the classrooms. Every time someone addresses her as Eun-byul, she feels a slight burning in her chest from anxiety and uncertainty. Her classmates, who are used to the cool and confident Go Eun-byul, notice the change in her behavior, but attribute it to the stress she's been through. Only Yi-han, who knows her best, senses that something is wrong. He notices that she has become softer, more reserved, as if she has lost the sharpness and sarcasm that had always been her defensive response. But he doesn't ask questions, assuming things will get better in time. Han Yi-in, who's been by Eun-byul's side since childhood, notices the change too. He thinks back to the moments they spent together and compares them to how she behaves now. Their bond was so deep that he senses even the subtlest changes in her behavior. His anxiety rises when he notices that she forgets small details from their past that she used to know by heart. Yi-in tries not to push her, writing it off as stress, but he can't shake the strange feeling that he's losing someone important. Eun-bi tries to find answers to her questions. One day, while going through the things in Go Eun-byul's room, she comes across a diary. The pages of the diary are filled with emotional entries that paint a picture of a life full of fears and worries. She reads about anxiety, an unknown man who is supposedly stalking Go Eun-byul, and feelings of loneliness despite her outward popularity. Each entry seems to scream that its owner has lived in constant fear. Eun-bi realizes that Go Eun-byul's life was not as perfect as it may have seemed from the outside. Meanwhile, tensions escalate when a shocking event occurs at school. At one point, Jung Michigan-ju suddenly realizes that her mother's expensive jewelry, which she took without asking, is missing. The school is in an uproar and everyone starts looking for the missing piece. Eun-bi, not suspecting anything wrong, goes to her locker to get her textbooks, but finds something unexpected. In her locker, among her textbooks and notebooks, is the same stolen jewelry. Shocked, she doesn't know how it got there. Suddenly, she's surrounded by a crowd of classmates, including Jeon Mi-ju. Mi-ju's look is a mixture of disappointment and bewilderment. She can't believe her best friend could do such a thing. Eun-bi tries to explain herself, but the words get stuck in her throat. Panic grips her as she realizes she's fallen into a trap. Kang So-yeon, who is watching the scene from afar, realizes with a satisfied smirk on her face that her plan has worked. Eun-bi continues to suffer the consequences of the incident involving the stolen jewelry found in her locker. Her relationship with her classmates deteriorates rapidly, and even Jung Mi-ju, her best friend, withdraws, unable to believe in Go Eun-byul's innocence. Eun-bi realizes that her position at school is becoming increasingly precarious. She has to face hostility and suspicious looks every day. The situation escalates when one of her classmates, a quiet and inconspicuous girl named Young-in, suddenly finds herself in the center of attention. She has always tried to keep a low profile, but now something is changing. In one of her classes, she suddenly starts drawing. No one pays much attention to it until her artwork starts walking around the classroom. These sheets depict all of her classmates, and each drawing is surprisingly accurate and expressive. She draws everyone with amazing accuracy, conveying not only their appearance but also their characteristic features, emotions, and inner states. These drawings cause excitement among the students. Everyone starts discussing them, some admiring Young-in's skill, others whispering that there is something frightening in the drawings. Eun-bi gets her portrait too, and the drawing particularly strikes her. She sees herself in it, sad and lonely, with eyes full of pain. It's as if the drawing reflects her true state, which she's been trying to hide. She realizes that Young-in sees her more deeply than the others, and it gives her mixed feelings. Meanwhile, Gong Tae-gwan, whose suspicions about Go Eun-byul are growing by the day, also pays attention to the drawings. He scrutinizes them, especially the portrait of Lee Eun-bi, and begins to guess that there's something in the story that no one has noticed yet. However, he is in no hurry to jump to conclusions, preferring to observe from the sidelines. Suddenly, after all the drawings have already been discussed, Young-in gathers his things and quietly leaves the classroom. No one pays much attention to this until they notice that she hasn't returned. After a while, it becomes clear that Young-in has left the school. The teachers inform her that she left with her mother, and the reason is given as a sudden family move. This news causes surprise among the students, but no one tries to find out what really happened. Lee Eun-bi is left alone with her thoughts. She's worried about Young-in's disappearance and the strange drawings she left behind. It seems to her that there's a message hidden in those drawings, something important that she hasn't realized yet. The drawing she received continues to disturb her. It's as if this portrait reveals her inner self, the part she tried to hide from everyone, including herself. Throughout the day, Lee Eun-bi feels uncomfortable. She continues to be tormented by questions she can't find answers to. She thinks about how the connection between her and the real Go Eun-byul is much deeper than she could have imagined. Back home in the evening, Lee Eun-bi flips through Go Eun-byul's diary again, hoping to find clues there. But every time she thinks she's close to a clue, a feeling of anxiety overwhelms her, making it hard for her to concentrate. Lee Eun-bi closes the diary and decides that the answers won't be found so easily. She realizes that she needs to proceed carefully and thoughtfully if she wants to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, discussions continue at school about Young-in's sudden departure. Her classmates share guesses, but no one knows what exactly made her leave school so suddenly. However, Lee Eun-bi is convinced that the drawings left behind carry some hidden meaning. She decides to keep her portrait, hoping that later she will be able to understand what Young-in was trying to say. Gong Tae-gwan, as he continues to watch Go Eun-byul, begins to suspect that her behavior is due to more than just a change of mood. His intuition tells him that Lee Eun-bi is hiding something, but he's in no hurry to reveal his hunch. Instead, he continues to study her behavior, trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Lee Eun-bi decides that she needs to go back to the people Go Eun-byul knew in order to learn more about her past. She realizes that in order to make sense of the situation, she needs to find out exactly what happened to Go Eun-byul before she disappeared. Only then will she be able to understand what ties their fates together, and perhaps find a way out of this predicament. As she finishes another day at school, Lee Eun-bi feels pressure from her classmates. Her suspicions that someone is deliberately trying to ruin her new life only grow stronger, but now she knows she can't let fear take over. She is determined to go all the way to find out the truth and protect herself in this complex and dangerous game she has been drawn into. The situation at school is not improving. The cold stares and whispers are becoming a familiar backdrop for Lee Eun-bi. Her presence in class raises more and more questions and suspicions, but she tries to keep her cool. Every day becomes a test of her stamina. At the same time, she realizes that the longer she puts off finding out the truth, the more dangerous her situation becomes. In one of her classes, Lee Eun-bi notices that Jung Michigan-ju and the other classmates are discussing her behind her back again. Despite Michigan-ju's attempts to keep her distance, her glances give away her true feelings. Lee Eun-bi decides that she needs to rebuild trust with at least one of her classmates, and she decides to talk to Mi-ju after class. But the conversation doesn't go as she planned. Mi-ju is clearly hostile, and her accusing words hurt Lee Eun-bi deeper than she expected. She tries to explain herself, but Mi-ju only waves her off, reproaching her for having changed and no longer being the Go Eun-byul she knew. After this conversation, Lee Eun-bi feels even more isolated. Her despair grows, but she decides not to give up. She realizes that if she wants to regain control of her life, she needs to focus on finding the truth. Her thoughts return to the strange events that started happening after her return as Go Eun-byul, and she begins to wonder if it's related to what happened before her disappearance. Meanwhile, Gong Tae-gwan, who is becoming more and more convinced that Go Eun-byul is hiding something, decides to take a different approach. He starts asking his classmates what they know about her life before she disappeared. His questions provoke surprise and wariness, but he skillfully disguises his true intentions as ordinary curiosity. Tae-gwan gathers bits of information that help him put the big picture together. Meanwhile, Lee Eun-bi continues to look for traces in Go Eun-byul's belongings. One evening she finds another detail that catches her attention. It's a note with a brief but disturbing message: we must meet. It's urgent. Lee Eun-bi realizes that this note could be a clue to what really happened to Go Eun-byul. Her heart begins to beat faster as she realizes that this very encounter could be the reason for everything that happened. Suddenly, the thought occurs to her that the person who wrote that message could have been related to the meeting she went to before. She decides to go to the meeting place again, hoping to find something that will help her advance her investigation. But she is overcome by fears. What if she stumbles upon something even more dangerous? Still, she feels she has no other choice. Lee Eun-bi decides to go to the meeting after school despite her fear and doubts. She tries to remain calm, but her inner tension still makes itself felt. She arrives at the designated place and begins to look around carefully. Time passes, but no one appears. Lee Eun-bi becomes frustrated, thinking that she has missed her chance to find out the truth. But at one point she notices a strange man who keeps to the shadows. He watches her from afar, but as soon as he realizes she's spotted him, he quickly hides. Lee Eun-bi is overcome with anxiety, and she decides that she needs to leave the place before it's too late. As she returns home, she realizes that the situation is becoming more and more dangerous. She now knows that someone is following her, and that person clearly doesn't want her to find out the truth. But this only strengthens her resolve. She decides that she must go all the way, despite the risks. Lee Eun-bi realizes that her life depends on her being able to solve the mystery surrounding Go Eun-byul's disappearance. Gong Tae-gwan watches closely as the events around Go Eun-byul unfold. He sees her life becoming more and more complicated under the pressure of Jeon-michigan-ju and the other classmates. Although he's used to staying out of the way, now his suspicions about Lee Eun-bi are growing by the day. He begins to notice that she's avoiding talking about the past, avoiding frank conversations, and this piques his interest. Tae-gwan decides to stay close to her, hoping to uncover her secret. Meanwhile, Jeon-michigan-ju makes new attempts to humiliate Lee Eun-bi. She notices that Go Eun-byul has become even more withdrawn and nervous. The atmosphere in the classroom heats up as Maiju starts spreading new rumors that further undermine Lee Eun-bi's credibility. She does her best to isolate her from the rest of the class, forcing her classmates to stay away from her. Lee Eun-bi, feeling the pressure building up, decides that she needs to find a way to protect herself and regain her reputation. She finds it increasingly difficult to hide her true self, but realizes that if she gives up now, she'll lose everything she's tried to build in her new life. She starts looking for ways to gather proof of her innocence in the jewelry story, as well as learning more about the real Go Eun-byul, hoping to find something that will help her figure out how to deal with the situation. Suddenly, the situation in the classroom changes when Tae-gwan decides to intervene. Seeing how Lee Eun-bi is suffering from Maiju's attacks, he decides to support her. Despite his reputation as a loner, he begins to communicate with her more openly, which perplexes and irritates her opponents. His actions become an unexpected source of support for Lee Eun-bi, though she remains wary of his intentions. Lee Eun-bi, on edge, decides to revisit Go Eun-byul's belongings once more. She hopes to find something that can help her make sense of what's going on. Her search leads her to another surprising discovery, a letter that Go Eun-byul apparently never sent. In this letter, written with desperation and fear, Go Eun-byul addresses someone she apparently feared. Lee Eun-bi realizes that in front of her is a clue to what really happened to Go Eun-byul. Finding the letter leads Lee Eun-bi to the idea of doing her own investigation. She decides to find out more about the person the letter was addressed to, and hopes that this information will help her understand what happened. The more she learns, the clearer it becomes that the real Go Eun-byul was playing a dangerous game, and that her disappearance is connected to something much more serious than first thought. Meanwhile, the pressure from Jeon-michigan-ju and the other classmates continues to mount. Lee Eun-bi has to hide her true emotions more and more, and hides behind Go Eun-byul's mask. Her inner conflict intensifies, and she begins to wonder how much longer she can pretend. But every time the fear of being exposed begins to overwhelm her, she remembers her determination to get to the truth and protect her new life. Things heat up when Lee Eun-bi finally decides to meet the person to whom Go Eun-byul's letter was addressed. She hopes that this meeting will give her answers to the questions that have plagued her since she woke up in the hospital. But this meeting turns out to be nothing like she imagined. Lee Eun-bi is confronted with an unexpected truth that jeopardizes everything she has tried to build. Suddenly, she realizes that the situation she finds herself in is far more dangerous than she thought. Her life hangs in the balance, and now she has to make a choice to keep fighting or admit defeat. After an unexpected meeting with the person to whom Go Eun-byul's letter was addressed, Lee Eun-bi finds herself in even more danger. During the previous conversation, she knows that Go Eun-byul was concerned about some dark history, could ruin her life if she became isolated. The man Lee Eun-bi met with makes it clear that he has a great reason to keep this information secret, and warns her against gradually analyzing into Go Eun-byul's past. Lee Eun-bi leaves the meeting at a loss. She realizes that she is on the verge of discovering something serious, but now she has to decide whether to keep digging further or whether it's better to stop and save her new life. The fear of exposure overwhelms her again, but her insistence on finding out the truth still outweighs her. She returns home and rereads the letter again, trying to find more clues in it. Things get increasingly tense in this situation. Jung Michigan-ju continues her attacks, trying to isolate Go Eun-byul from the rest of her classmates. She turns even those who recently considered her a friend against her. Following Michigan-ju's example, the classmates refuse to socialize with Lee Eun-bi, and she becomes increasingly lonely. Gong Hee-gwan, however, continues to stay close to her, though he doesn't directly interfere with her. He notices that Lee Eun-bi is becoming more and more withdrawn, and this only heightens his suspicions. One day after class, Lee Eun-bi decides to talk to Tae-gwan to find out what he knows. She is annoyed by his constant attention and wishes he would stop following her. However, when she tries to strike up a conversation, Tae-gwan suddenly shows understanding and says that he has no malicious intent. He only wants to understand what's going on with Go Eun-byul. Their conversation leads Lee Eun-bi to question her suspicions about Tae-gwan. She decides to give him a chance and allows the possibility that he really wants to help. Meanwhile, Lee Eun-bi's internal conflict reaches its peak. On the one hand, she realizes that if she continues to investigate, she may uncover a secret that could cost her a new life. On the other hand, she is tormented by the thought that she is living someone else's life, and that Go Eun-byul is without a doubt the truth. Lee Eun-bi realizes that her search for the truth could lead to devastating consequences, but she can't just leave it at that. Amidst these worries, she begins to notice that someone at school is following her. This scares her, but she decides not to show her fear and tries to behave as usual. Her anxiety grows, however, when she finds a note in her locker that says she'd better stop looking if she doesn't want to follow dangerous consequences. Lee Eun-bi realizes that someone wants to silence her, but that only counters her determination. With all of these events occurring, Lee Eun-bi is having trouble, becoming increasingly anxious and fearful. It's getting harder and harder for her to hide her emotions, but she realizes she can't give up. She has only one thought on her mind: she must find out what really happened to Go Eun-byul and why this story is so dangerous. The tension culminates when Lee Eun-bi suddenly finds herself face to face with a man she has met before. He has reappeared at school to get to the point where she has gone too far. At this moment, Lee Eun-bi realizes that she has no turning back. She now has a choice to make: continue to negotiate the truth, risk everything she has, or succeed as a result of the investigations to save her life. Lee Eun-bi realizes that not only her fate, but also the fate of the real Go Eun-byul depends on her decision. The situation becomes more complicated when she discovers that her enemies are much closer than she thought. Now she will have to act with even more caution to avoid falling prey to those who would try to hide the truth. After a tense confrontation with a man who threatened her, Lee Eun-bi sinks into her thoughts as she tries to make sense of the situation. She realizes that her life now depends on her every move. Her inner fear intensifies, but with it comes a determination to get to the truth about what happened to Go Eun-byul. The next day at school, Lee Eun-bi faces another problem. Jung Michigan-ju decides to take a more aggressive approach, believing that Go Eun-byul is still a threat to her social standing. She makes a public scene in class, accusing Lee Eun-bi of trying to ruin her life. Her classmates begin to question who is right in this situation, but most continue to support Mi-ju without risking confrontation. This confrontation erodes Lee Eun-bi's confidence. She feels even more isolated but realizes that she must continue to fight. At that moment, she is suddenly approached by Gong Tae-gwan. He decides to support her, despite the distrust that still hovers between them. Tae-gwan says that he saw someone following her after school and offers his help. Lee Eun-bi is hesitant at first, but seeing the sincerity in his eyes, she decides to trust him. Tae-gwan starts to help her investigate what's going on. They decide to find out who is behind the notes and threats. The two of them start gathering information about the person who met Lee Eun-bi earlier. Tae-gwan uses his contacts to find out more about him, and soon they find a key clue that points to the man's connection to one of the school's influential students. Lee Eun-bi realizes that there's more than just a school feud behind it all, but something much more serious. Meanwhile, Jung Michigan-ju begins to suspect that her actions may be getting out of control. She notices that Go Eun-byul still has the strength to fight, and it worries her. Mi-ju decides to find out what's really going on and starts her own investigation to find out what her ex-girlfriend is hiding. Lee Eun-bi continues to investigate Go Eun-byul's secrets, realizing that each new step brings her closer to the dangerous truth. Together with Gong Tae-gwang, she analyzes all the evidence she finds, including Go Eun-byul's blog entries. From these entries, it becomes clear that Go Eun-byul was in constant fear and was under someone else's pressure. Lee Eun-bi begins to suspect that it was this fear that led her to disappear. Realizing that the information from the blog could be a clue, Lee Eun-bi decides to go even further. She begins to look for additional evidence that could link the person from the blog to the events happening now. Lee Eun-bi feels like she's on the verge of exposing a big secret, but fear of the possible consequences still restrains her. Meanwhile, Gong Tae-gwang grows closer and closer to Lee Eun-bi. He realizes that she's really in a serious trouble and decides not to leave her alone. He confesses that he has also faced injustice in the past and knows what it's like to be in danger and afraid that no one will help. This conversation strengthens their bond, and Lee Eun-bi begins to trust him more and more. In the evening, Lee Eun-bi receives a new message from an anonymous sender, again warning her to stop searching, or it could end badly. Instead of being scared, Lee Eun-bi feels that this message is a sign that she is close to finding out. She decides not to hide anymore, and instead go towards the danger. Lee Eun-bi shares her thoughts with Tae-gwang, and together they decide it's time to go on the offensive. They arrange a new meeting with the man who threatened Lee Eun-bi earlier. This time, Lee Eun-bi feels more confident. She realizes that the man is trying to intimidate her, but now she has a goal to find out what really happened to Go Eun-byul. Upon meeting the man, Lee Eun-bi shows no fear, asking questions directly and firmly. The man becomes nervous, but still reveals that Go Eun-byul was involved in some sort of secret deal, the consequences of which could have been devastating. After the meeting, Lee Eun-bi and Tae-gwang discuss the information they received and conclude that Go Eun-byul probably learned something that put her life in danger. Now Lee Eun-bi realizes that her own life could also be in danger if she continues down this path. However, she decides not to back down, because the truth is more important to her than anything else. Lee Eun-bi becomes increasingly cautious, realizing that her investigation is attracting unwanted attention. Her actions continue to be monitored, and her every move now seems to be under scrutiny. She begins to notice that her life is becoming more and more like a dangerous game, where any mistake could cost her everything. Meanwhile, Gong Tae-gwang remains her only ally. He tries to be there for her, supporting Lee Eun-bi and helping her not only physically, but also mentally. Tae-gwang suggests that they continue to study Go Eun-byul's blog and her other personal writings in hopes of finding something that might shed light on the events leading up to her disappearance. They both realize that the clue is hidden somewhere in Go Eun-byul's past, and that only by delving deeper into her life will they be able to understand what they are dealing with. During their investigation, Lee Eun-bi finds another strange entry in Go Eun-byul's diary. In this entry, she mentions a certain secret that she had to keep at all costs. This secret was apparently the reason for her fear and the fact that she was constantly looking over her shoulder. Lee Eun-bi begins to guess that Go Eun-byul was involved in more than just school intrigue, and this only makes her more determined to find out the truth. However, the more Lee Eun-bi learns, the more she realizes how deep she'll have to dig to uncover the secret. At the same time, her fears become more and more real. One night, she notices a shadow outside her house, and it makes her realize that the threat is much closer than she thought. She begins to fear for her safety, but it's too late to retreat. Amidst all these events, Gong Tae-gwang suggests that Lee Eun-bi meet with someone she knows from her old days who might know more about what Go Eun-byul was up to before she disappeared. They arrange a meeting with Go Eun-byul's former friend, who had previously avoided talking about the topic. During the meeting, the friend, reluctant at first, but still reveals that Go Eun-byul often talked about a certain person who was dangerous to her, but the details remained unknown. This encounter gives Lee Eun-bi and Tae-gwang new information to ponder. They begin to hypothesize about who this man might have been, and what role he played in Go Eun-byul's disappearance. Tae-gwang suggests that perhaps Go Eun-byul was involved in some illegal activity that got her into trouble, but Lee Eun-bi refuses to believe that her sister could have been involved in something like that. However, everything indicates that the situation is much more serious than they thought. At this time, Lee Eun-bi begins to feel that everything around her is becoming unstable. She notices that someone is trying to turn the people she thought were her allies against her. Strange rumors about her behavior start circulating at school, and it isolates her even more. She realizes that someone is deliberately trying to take away her support and make her feel alone and helpless. After meeting her friend Go Eun-byul, Lee Eun-bi feels that she has finally gotten closer to the truth. she and Gong Tae-gwang discuss the next steps and conclude that the next key step is to find out the identity of the person Go Eun-byul mentioned in her notes. Eun-bi realizes that this could be extremely dangerous, but it's too late to back out. She must find out what really happened to her sister and why her life has been jeopardized. At school, Eun-bi is under increasing pressure from the fear of her true identity being revealed. Someone keeps spreading rumors and sowing doubts among her classmates. This only intensifies her desire to finally put an end to this nightmare. Eun-bi and Tae-gwang begin to investigate Go Eun-byul's social circle to find people who might know more about her connections and possible enemies. They visit several places that Go Eun-byul has frequented and try to find out who might have been stalking her. During this search, Eun-bi encounters an unexpected obstacle. Someone is trying to take her out of the game by intimidating her and threatening her safety. One day, she discovers that someone has left a sign at her house, a strange note warning that her investigation could end badly. Eun-bi realizes that the danger is growing, and that she is now even more in the crosshairs of those who don't want the truth to surface. In the course of her search, Eun-bi begins to recall small details from her childhood and life at the orphanage that have seemingly been forgotten. These memories lead her to believe that her and Go Eun-byul's fates did not cross by chance. Perhaps their pasts are much more deeply connected than she could have imagined. She begins to realize that Go Eun-byul might know something important that Eun-bi didn't even know. After a tense encounter, Eun-bi returns home, realizing that her opponent is far more dangerous than she thought. The words of the man she spoke to linger in her mind. She realizes that this man isn't just intimidating her, he's actually willing to go to extreme lengths to keep his secrets. Fear begins to engulf her, but she realizes she can't let it take over. Eun-bi decides that she needs to proceed even more cautiously. The next day at school, Eun-bi feels the stares of her classmates. The atmosphere in the classroom becomes more and more tense, and she feels like someone has already guessed that she is not who she says she is. Eun-bi begins to worry that her double life may soon be revealed. In the meantime, Gong Tae-gwang stays by her side as before, supporting her and helping her cope with the mounting pressure. He sees that she's starting to tire and offers to take a short break from the investigation, but Eun-bi refuses. At the same time, Eun-bi continues to study Go Eun-byul's diaries and notes, hoping to find some more clues. She delves into thoughts of what she might have missed, and at one point it hits her. In one of Go Eun-byul's entries, she mentions a certain place where she kept her most important secrets, a place no one could get to. Eun-bi realizes that this could be a clue. With Tae-gwang's help, they find the place, a small secluded space in one of the abandoned parts of the school. There, they discover a hiding place where Go Eun-byul kept things that no one else knew about. Among these items, Eun-bi finds an old cell phone that appears to be Go Eun-byul's. The phone turns out to be a real find. It contains messages and recordings of conversations that Go Eun-byul had made shortly before her disappearance. By studying the contents of the phone, Eun-bi learns about the numerous threats her sister had received, as well as meetings with a man who tried to manipulate her. In one of the messages, Go Eun-byul hints at a certain secret that could ruin the lives of not only her, but many other people if it became known. Eun-bi realizes that this secret is the reason why her sister is in such a dangerous situation. Eun-bi returns home, after a tense meeting, trying to make sense of what she has learned. Now she has not just evidence, but the key to uncovering what happened to Go Eun-byul. She realizes that her life is in danger, and that she needs to act quickly and decisively to keep herself safe. Eun-bi continues to keep Go Eun-byul's found phone with her, realizing its importance and the danger it carries. Meanwhile, at school, Eun-bi faces growing tensions. Her attempts to act like a normal Go Eun-byul increasingly resemble brinkmanship. Her classmates continue to discuss her strange behavior behind her back, and some of them begin to outright avoid her. She realizes that her position is becoming increasingly precarious. Despite Gong Tae-gwang's support, she feels increasingly alone in her struggle. Eun-bi decides it's time to use the information she has. She plans to put the data she's found in safe hands, but she encounters a new threat. One day after school, she begins to be stalked again. This time the threat is clear. She is being followed by a man who is trying to corner her. Eun-bi manages to escape, but she realizes that her enemies are becoming more and more determined. They devise a plan to hand over the phone and the information it contains to someone they can trust. But before they carry out their plan, they decide to once again scrutinize everything they've gathered. In the process, they stumble upon new details that they had previously missed. These new clues indicate that Go Eun-byul may have known too much about some shady dealings related to the man who threatened her and is now threatening Eun-bi. The growing sense of danger keeps Eun-bi uneasy. She begins to notice more and more unfamiliar faces around her, and it seems to her that she is being followed even on the streets. When she returns home in the evening, she sees that someone is following her again. Panic-stricken, she tries to escape, but is caught up. Lee Eun-bi manages to escape, but realizes that her life now hangs in the balance. This incident spurs her to take drastic action. When Lee Eun-bi finally hands over the phone, she feels some relief. However, her soul is plagued by doubts: are they really safe now, or is this just the beginning of more problems? She knows that the secret they've uncovered is too dangerous to leave without consequences. After handing over the phone with the key evidence, Lee Eun-bi and Gong Tae-gwan feel a mixture of relief and anxiety. It seems like the most dangerous step has been taken, but they realize that their enemies may become even more aggressive. Lee Eun-bi knows that she must now be prepared for any eventuality, because those who have been pursuing her will not give up trying to cover up the case. Gong Tae-gwan, who is still around, shares his concerns. He thinks they should lay low for a while so that their enemies will lose track of them. But Lee Eun-bi doesn't want to just sit idly by. She feels she must find out how the situation will unfold next, and be prepared for any turn of events. At this time, she receives an unexpected message from the very person they gave the phone to. The message says that the information they passed on is really important, and now their case has been placed in the hands of people who will be able to deal with it. However, the sender warns that Lee Eun-bi's enemies will not stop and will probably try to strike back. Soon after, Lee Eun-bi notices strange changes in the behavior of some of her classmates. It seems to her that a few begin to avoid her, as if they are afraid of being dragged into the situation. She notices that those who used to be friends with Go Eun-byul are now trying to stay away from her, further increasing her suspicions. Perhaps some of them know more than meets the eye. Lee Eun-bi decides to talk to a few of them herself, hoping to find out what they know about the events that took place before Go Eun-byul disappeared. During one of these conversations with Go Eun-byul's former friend, she accidentally learns that there was another dark side to her life: connections with people who were much more dangerous than they seemed at first glance. This person insinuates that Go Eun-byul may have been involved with something illegal, and that it led to terrible consequences. Lee Eun-bi increasingly realizes the magnitude of the danger she is in. New revelations about Go Eun-byul's life make her feel the weight of the burden she now carries. Realizing that her sister has been involved in criminal affairs, she realizes that their enemies may be far more powerful than she imagined. Back at school, tensions reach their peak. Lee Eun-bi notices that some of her classmates are starting to act strangely. She feels that some of them might know about her true identity, or at least guess that she is not the real Go Eun-byul. This thought keeps her on her toes, but she decides to keep investigating despite the risks. Gong Tae-gwan, realizing that they're getting closer and closer to the dangerous truth, suggests that they have one last few meetings to put together the missing pieces of the puzzle. Lee Eun-bi agrees, but her anxiety grows stronger by the day. She realizes that the closer they get to the clue, the more likely it is that their enemies will strike first. She and Tae-gwan start looking for a way to bring their enemies out in the open. They decide that they need to find a way to publicize the crimes Go Eun-byul was involved in, and do it in a way that no one can cover it up. Lee Eun-bi realizes that this move could be her last chance to defend herself in justice. They decide to go to a journalist they can trust and give him all the evidence they have gathered. Lee Eun-bi realizes that this is a risky move, but she has no other choice. She contacts the journalist and arranges a meeting, realizing that this meeting could be the key to her struggle. When the meeting finally takes place, Lee Eun-bi and Tae-gwan give the journalist all the information. They ask him to publish everything they found so that the truth can finally be known. The journalist, realizing the seriousness of the case, agrees to help, but warns them that it could cause a strong backlash from their enemies. The journalist promises to conduct a thorough investigation based on the material she's been given and publish the results as soon as she gathers enough evidence. However, Lee Eun-bi realizes that time is playing against her, and the longer the process drags on, the more likely it is that their enemies will cover their tracks or, worse, hurt her and her family. At school, the atmosphere remains tense. Lee Eun-bi feels the atmosphere thickening around her. Her suspicions are heightened when she notices that some of her classmates have clearly started following her, as if they know she is hiding something. She realizes that her position is becoming increasingly vulnerable. Meanwhile, Gong Tae-gwan tries to keep her spirits up. He realizes that Lee Eun-bi is under tremendous pressure, and tries to be there for her in her most difficult moments. They continue to plan their actions, discussing how best to proceed if their enemies decide to go for more drastic measures. Tae-gwan convinces Lee Eun-bi to be extremely cautious and not to do anything rash. Meanwhile, Lee Eun-bi begins to feel that she is being followed again. This time her suspicions are confirmed when she returns home one evening and is caught up with a man she doesn't immediately recognize. It turns out to be the same man she met earlier, who warned her to stop investigating. His behavior is much more aggressive this time. He demands that she immediately give him all the evidence and stop cooperating with the journalist. Lee Eun-bi finds herself trapped, but decides not to show fear. She firmly states that the information has already been passed on and there is no stopping it. This conversation makes it clear to her that she made the right choice in asking for help, but also realizes that she is now in real danger. After this encounter, Lee Eun-bi realizes that she can no longer feel safe even at home. She decides to take precautions to protect herself and those she cares about. Gong Tae-gwan, upon hearing about the incident, suggests that Lee Eun-bi leave town for a while and lay low while the journalist completes his investigation. She refuses, however, deciding that she should be here to prepare for any attack. Instead, they arrange a meeting with the journalist to find out where his work stands and when they can expect publication. During the meeting, the journalist informs them that he is facing serious difficulties. Someone is trying to disrupt his investigation, and he has received several warnings clearly implying that the case is best left alone. He is convinced that behind this is not just a group of criminals, but people with enormous power and influence, who will stop at nothing to keep their secrets. Nevertheless, he promises not to back down and see this through, but asks Lee Eun-bi and Tae-gwan to be extremely careful. After this meeting, Lee Eun-bi begins to prepare herself for the possible consequences. She realizes that she needs to be prepared for all kinds of scenarios. She discusses with Tae-gwan how they should act if things get out of hand, and they decide to prepare some plans in case they have to hide or escape. A few days later, Lee Eun-bi starts receiving new threats, this time more direct and dangerous. These threats arrive on her phone and make it clear that her life is in real danger. But instead of being scared, she feels a new resolve within her. She now knows that the truth is close at hand, and she just needs a little more time for things to fall into place. Lee Eun-bi decides to gather those she trusts and share her story with them so that if something happens to her, they can continue her cause. She meets with a few people close to her, including Gong Tae-gwan, and tells them what she's been through and what she's learned. Lee Eun-bi feels that her investigation is nearing completion. All efforts to solve the mystery of Go Eun-byul's disappearance seem close to success, but one thing still remains unsolved. She can't stop thinking about her sister and what might have happened to her. Everything changes the moment Lee Eun-bi receives an unexpected call. On the other end of the line is Go Eun-byul. The voice she hasn't heard in so long makes her heart clench. Go Eun-byul is alive and in a safe place she managed to get to after being forced to disappear. The sisters arrange a reunion, full of anxiety but also joy at their impending reunion. Lee Eun-bi and Gong Tae-gwan meet Go Eun-byul at a secluded place. Go Eun-byul tells her story how she was forced into hiding to protect not only herself, but also her loved ones. Her attempts to get out of the criminal circle were met with resistance from those who didn't want to lose control of the situation. Realizing that her life was in danger, she made the decision to disappear to buy time and find a way to tell the truth. Lee Eun-bi feels a huge sense of relief when she learns that her sister is alive. But they realize that now it's time to tell the whole truth. Together with Go Eun-byul and Tae-gwan, they decide that the only way to put an end to this nightmare is to reveal the whole story to their classmates and expose those behind the crimes. At school, Lee Eun-bi and Go Eun-byul get the attention of all their classmates. At first, there is surprise on their faces as they see two sisters who are supposed to be the same person. A tense silence hangs in the classroom as Lee Eun-bi and Go Eun-byul begin to tell their story, a story of lies, substitution, and survival. They talk about what they've been through, how they've been persecuted, and how they fought for their lives. The classmates are shocked and confused at first, but as the sisters continue their story, they come to realize what Lee Eun-bi and Go Eun-byul have been through. Gradually, their faces soften, and an air of understanding and sympathy begins to spread in the audience. Lee Eun-bi and Go Eun-byul talk about how the truth must be known even if it hurts. After the whole truth is revealed, the classmates start asking questions, trying to figure out how they should perceive the two sisters now. Lee Eun-bi and Go Eun-byul explain that they both had to sacrifice a lot to survive and protect their loved ones. Together, they make a decision to put all the grudges and misunderstandings behind them in order to start their lives anew. Gong Tae-gwan, watching the scene, feels satisfied that their struggle has finally come to an end. He sees the sisters coming together and finding the strength to confront the past and start a new chapter in their lives. The internal conflict that has plagued Lee Eun-bi for so long is finally resolved. The story ends with Lee Eun-bi and Go Eun-byul leaving the school building together, knowing that a new life lies ahead of them. They realize that the journey has not been easy, but now they have each other and the support of people who are willing to accept them for who they are. Together they can cope with any difficulties and look forward to the future with confidence.